Maria Lopez was in her office on a quiet afternoon, sorting through paperwork for a minor case, when the phone rang. On the other end of the line, a nervous man introduced himself as Father Hector, the leader of a small religious congregation located in the heart of New Mexico. He urgently needed her help. His church was being accused of involvement in a drug smuggling operation. According to him, the DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, alleged that members of the congregation were transporting drugs hidden inside sacred statues, shipping them to other states, and potentially overseas. His voice trembled with desperation. "This has to be a mistake, Ms. Lopez," he said. "We are a simple congregation, dedicated to our faith. We believe we've been framed, but we have no idea by whom or how." Maria listened carefully, her mind already skeptical. This wasn't the first time she had heard clients claim innocence. Experience had taught her that the truth was often more complex than what was said over the phone. Still, she accepted the case, intrigued by the boldness of the accusations. How could anyone use sacred art to transport drugs without raising suspicion? Something was off, and Maria knew there was always more beneath the surface in cases like these. The next day, she drove out to St. Christopher's Church, a modest red brick building with a large crucifix at the entrance. The simplicity of the place starkly contrasted with the allegations of drug cartel involvement. As she entered, Father Hector greeted her, an elderly man with tired eyes, clearly weighed down by the accusations. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Lopez," he said, leading her to a makeshift meeting room at the back of the church. Inside were two other members of the congregation, Dolores, an older woman who managed the church's finances, and Carlos, a quiet man responsible for much of the church's charity work in the community. After hearing more details, Maria began asking direct questions. "What concerns me, Father, is the severity of the charges. The DEA rarely gets involved in something this big without solid evidence. Do you have any idea if someone in your congregation might be involved without your knowledge?" Father Hector hesitated for a moment before responding. "We're a small congregation. I know everyone, or at least I thought I did." He glanced briefly at Carlos, who remained silent, his head lowered. Later that afternoon, Maria visited the local police station where the DEA was conducting its investigation. Reviewing the evidence, she learned that the sacred statues were being crafted by a supplier in Mexico, shipped to the church in the U.S., and allegedly distributed from there to other cities. Most of the statues were of popular saints, such as St. Jude and Our Lady of Guadalupe, and the drugs were cleverly hidden in cavities inside the statues, going undetected even by careful inspection. "This is a sophisticated operation," Maria remarked to one of the agents. "Someone from the inside must be involved. Have you followed all the leads?" The agent looked at her coldly. "We're investigating, but we know cartels are behind this. They're using people's religious beliefs to move their product." Maria left the station feeling uneasy. Something wasn't adding up. The DEA was confident that church members were involved, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that the congregation was just a pawn in a much larger game. She knew she had to dig deeper, find out who was really behind this, but first, she had to protect her clients from being crushed by forces far more powerful than the justice system she believed in. Days after their initial meeting, Maria began her investigation with a visit to the workshop in Mexico where the statues originated. The DEA had provided little information on the craftsman who created these religious figures, only that he was a known artist who specialized in sacred sculptures. His name was Enrique Silva, a sculptor renowned for his beautiful, hand-carved pieces that adorn churches across Latin America. When Maria arrived at his small studio, hidden in the outskirts of Oaxaca, she was greeted by the sight of half-finished statues, scattered tools, and blocks of raw wood. Enrique, a wiry man in his 50s with weathered hands and a soft smile, welcomed her cautiously. "You're here about the statues?" Enrique asked, wiping his hands on his apron as he led Maria into the workshop. His tone was measured, guarded. "Yes," Maria replied. "I'm representing a congregation in New Mexico, St. Christopher's. Several of your statues were sent there, and the DEA is claiming they were used to smuggle drugs." Enrique's face darkened at the mention of the DEA. "I carve religious figures, not contraband. This has nothing to do with me," he said defensively. Maria could tell Enrique wasn't telling her everything, but she pressed on carefully. "Do you know who else handles these statues after they leave your workshop? Could someone be tampering with them during shipping?" Enrique shook his head. "No. I have a single distributor, someone I trust. His name is Jorge Fuentes. He manages the logistics. He's the only one who deals with shipping. After the statues leave my studio, they're out of my hands." Maria took note of the name. Jorge Fuentes. She'd need to find out more about this man and his role in the process. If the statues were being used to transport drugs, it was possible Fuentes was involved, or at the very least, knew more than Enrique was willing to admit. Before leaving the workshop, Maria asked one more question. Have you noticed anything unusual in recent months? Large orders, new clients, anything that stands out? Enrique hesitated for a moment, then spoke. A few months ago, Jorge told me we had a large order for statues going to various churches in the US. It was unusual, but I didn't ask questions. These statues are expensive, and it's not every day someone buys them in bulk. But now, with these accusations, I wonder if I should have. With that final remark, Maria left Enrique's workshop, her mind racing. If the bulk order was tied to the smuggling operation, then the next step would be tracking down Jorge Fuentes. He was the missing link, the one person who could be manipulating the distribution process. That evening, Maria returned to her hotel, only to find an envelope waiting for her at the front desk. No name, no address, just her room number scrawled on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a chilling message: stop asking questions. Or else. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Someone was watching her every move. But who? Was it the cartel? The local police? Or someone closer to the church? One thing was certain, this case was more dangerous than she had anticipated. The next morning, Maria wasted no time. She knew she had to move quickly before the threats became more than just words. Her first task was to track down Jorge Fuentes, the mysterious distributor Enrique had mentioned. A few calls to her contacts in Mexico pointed her to a small town near the border, where Fuentes operated a modest shipping company. As she approached the dusty office, Maria could see the wear and tear on the building, a sign of a business that operated below the radar. Inside, Jorge Fuentes, a man in his late 40s with sharp eyes and a heavy demeanor, sat behind a cluttered desk. He barely looked up as Maria entered. Mr. Fuentes, I'm Maria Lopez, a defense attorney representing St. Christopher's Church in New Mexico. I'd like to ask you a few questions about some statues you shipped to them recently, she said, her tone calm but firm. Jorge's eyes flicked up at her, scanning her face. I don't know anything about any statues, he muttered, clearly agitated. His hands fidgeted on the desk, and Maria could sense his discomfort. These are large religious statues, carved by Enrique Silva. They were part of a big order sent to several churches. The DEA believes they were used to smuggle drugs, Maria continued, watching his reaction closely. Jorge's face tightened, and he stood up abruptly. I'm not involved in any of that. My business is clean, he said, his voice rising slightly. I ship what I'm paid to ship, nothing more. Maybe you didn't know, Maria said, leaning forward, keeping her voice steady. But someone is using your shipments, and they're getting people hurt. If you know anything, now is the time to come forward. For a moment, it seemed like Jorge might break. He glanced nervously out the window, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Then, his voice dropped to a whisper. You don't understand who you're dealing with, he said, his eyes narrowing. These people, they're dangerous. You keep digging, and they'll come for you too. Maria's pulse quickened. She had suspected involvement from a cartel, but this was the first confirmation that powerful forces were at play. Before she could press further, Jorge walked over to the door and opened it. You should leave now, he said, not looking at her. Reluctantly, Maria stepped outside, but as she walked away, she made a mental note to have Jorge watched. He was hiding something, and she needed to figure out what it was, quickly. Later that night, as Maria sat reviewing her notes, a sudden knock on her hotel door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, she approached the door and peered through the peephole. A shadowy figure stood just out of view, and as she opened the door, a small package was dropped at her feet. She opened the package cautiously. Inside was a small, intricately carved statue of the Virgin Mary, similar to the ones described in the case. But this one was different. A piece of the statue had been removed, revealing a hollowed-out compartment. Inside the cavity was a small bag of white powder. Cocaine. Maria's breath caught in her throat. This was proof, undeniable proof that the statues were being used to smuggle drugs. But who had sent it? And why? Just then, her phone buzzed with a new message: leave this alone, or we'll make sure you never leave Mexico. Maria's heart raced. The warnings were escalating, and now she was in possession of incriminating evidence. She realized that whoever was behind this was watching her every move, and the stakes had just been raised to a deadly level. Maria knew she was running out of time. The threats were becoming more serious, and now, with the incriminating statue in her possession, she was in even greater danger. She quickly packed her things, intent on leaving Mexico and heading back to the US with the evidence. However, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. At the airport, as she stood in line for security, Maria's phone vibrated. A message appeared on the screen: "You won't make it home." Her eyes darted around the terminal, scanning the faces of passengers and staff, but no one seemed out of place. Anxiety gnawed at her, but she couldn't let it show. The cartel was obviously monitoring her closely, and any sign of fear could make her an easier target. Once through security, Maria boarded her flight, gripping the small statue tightly in her carry-on bag. She was careful to avoid drawing attention, but the pressure was mounting. By the time she touched down in New Mexico, her thoughts were racing, calculating the next steps. She needed to take the evidence straight to the DEA, but she also had to ensure the safety of her clients, Father Hector and the congregation, before things escalated further. Maria's first stop after landing was her office, where she made a call to Agent Derek Mitchell, a high-ranking member of the DEA who had been involved in the case. He was surprised to hear from her, but when she mentioned the statue, his tone shifted. "Bring it to my office. Now," he ordered, his voice tense. Within an hour, Maria sat across from Agent Mitchell at a heavily secured DEA office. She placed the statue on the table between them, carefully opening it to reveal the hidden compartment and the bag of cocaine inside. Mitchell's face remained expressionless as he inspected the statue. "This confirms everything," he said quietly. "We've been tracking shipments like these for months, but never had solid proof. This changes things." "Who's behind it?" Maria pressed. "Is it one of the cartels? My clients are innocent, and they're being framed for something much bigger." Mitchell leaned back, crossing his arms. "It's complicated. We're dealing with an international operation. Cartels have been moving drugs through sacred art for years. It's a perfect cover. Churches rarely get inspected with the same scrutiny. But you need to understand, these people don't just disappear when exposed. They retaliate. We've had agents killed for less than what you've uncovered." Maria's stomach sank. She had suspected this was bigger than just a few local players, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. Still, she refused to back down. "We need to protect the church," she insisted. "And I need to know who in the US is involved. Someone's orchestrating this on both sides of the border." Mitchell hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "There are whispers about certain law enforcement officers being compromised. We don't know how high up it goes, but there's corruption. You'll have to be careful, Lopez. Trust no one until we get to the bottom of this." As Maria left the DEA office, a sense of false victory washed over her. For a brief moment, she thought she had made real progress. But as she drove back toward the church, headlights appeared in her rearview mirror. A black SUV had been following her since she left the office, keeping a careful distance. Her pulse quickened. Whoever was watching her wasn't finished yet. And as she sped up to try and lose them, a sinking feeling set in. This fight was far from over, and the players on the other side were just getting started. Maria's heart raced as the black SUV trailed her through the narrow streets of Albuquerque. She made sharp turns, weaving through traffic in an attempt to shake her pursuers, but the vehicle stayed close. She knew she was in real danger now. The cartel, or whoever was behind this, wasn't just watching her anymore. They were closing in. Her mind raced for options. She couldn't go to the church, it would only put Father Hector and the congregation in more danger. She also couldn't trust anyone from law enforcement, not until she figured out who among them had been compromised. Maria needed a safe place, somewhere to regroup and come up with a plan. As she approached an intersection, she made a split-second decision, turning sharply onto a side street and pulling into the parking garage of a nearby shopping center. The SUV roared past, missing her turn. Maria exhaled, but she knew it was only temporary. They would circle back soon. She needed to think fast. Pulling out her phone, she dialed the one person she knew could help in a situation like this, Gabriel Morales, a former client and now a trusted friend. Gabriel had a shady past, but he owed Maria after she got his case dismissed years ago. His connections in the underworld might be her only lifeline. "Maria, it's been a while," Gabriel answered, his voice casual but alert. "What's going on?" "I'm in trouble, Gabriel," Maria said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need a place to hide, just for a few hours. I think the cartel is after me." There was a pause, then Gabriel's tone shifted. "Where are you?" She gave him the address of the shopping center, and within minutes, Gabriel arrived in a beat-up pickup truck. Maria climbed in, glancing nervously over her shoulder as they drove off. "You've gotten yourself into some serious business," Gabriel said, keeping his eyes on the road. "Cartels don't play around." "What did you do?" "I uncovered something big. They're smuggling drugs inside religious statues, and now they're trying to silence me before I can expose them. Worse, there are cops involved. I don't know who I can trust." Gabriel shook his head. "You're in deeper than I thought. But I know a place where you can lay low for a while." They drove in silence to the outskirts of town, where Gabriel led her to an old, abandoned warehouse. Inside, it was dark and dusty, but Maria knew it was safer than being out in the open. She couldn't help but feel trapped, though. Hiding wouldn't solve anything. She needed to get ahead of this, figure out who was orchestrating the operation from within law enforcement, and protect the church. After an hour of restless pacing, Maria's phone buzzed with a new message: "Time's running out. Choose wisely, your life or your clients." The threat sent a jolt through her, but this time, instead of fear, it ignited something else: determination. Maria knew she was being cornered, and now she had a choice to make: protect herself, or risk everything for the truth. But as she thought about Father Hector and the innocent people in his congregation, she realized she couldn't abandon them. "I need your help, Gabriel," she said, turning to him. "I have to find out who's on the cartel's payroll. There has to be a connection between the shipments, the DEA investigation, and the police." Gabriel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I can ask around, but you have to be careful, Maria. People get killed over this kind of thing." "I know," she replied, her voice steady. "But I don't have a choice. I can't walk away from this." As Gabriel made his calls, Maria began piecing together everything she had learned. Someone powerful was pulling the strings, using the church as a cover for their operation, and that person was closer than she'd ever imagined. And then, just as the pieces began to fall into place, her phone rang again. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something told her to answer. A voice she hadn't expected to hear greeted her on the other end. "Ms. Lopez, I think we need to talk," said Agent Mitchell, his voice tense. "There's more to this case than you know." Maria felt a surge of mixed emotions as Agent Mitchell's voice came through the phone. She had trusted him, but now she was unsure if he was part of the problem or a potential ally. Taking a deep breath, she decided to hear him out. "Agent Mitchell," she began cautiously, "what do you know that I don't?" There was a brief pause before Mitchell responded. "There are elements within the DEA that are compromised. High-ranking officers have been taking bribes to turn a blind eye to certain operations. The cartel has deep roots, and they've managed to infiltrate our system at multiple levels." Maria's mind raced. If true, this meant the corruption was more extensive than she had feared. "Do you have evidence of this?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Mitchell sighed. "I do, but it's not enough to expose them without putting more lives at risk, including yours. I need you to help me gather more information discreetly. In return, I can provide protection for you and your clients." Maria weighed her options. Trusting an agent who admitted corruption within his own ranks was risky, but she had little choice. "What do you need me to do?" "There's a meeting happening tonight at a private club in Albuquerque. It's where the compromised officers and cartel leaders discuss their operations. If you can get in, gather as much evidence as possible, and get out without raising suspicion, it could be the breakthrough we need." Maria hesitated. Infiltrating a meeting of corrupt law enforcement and cartel members was dangerous, but it might be her only chance to save her clients and uncover the truth. "I'll do it," she said finally. "But I need your guidance." Mitchell agreed to meet her the next morning to go over the plan. As she hung up, Maria felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. The stakes were higher than ever, and failure was not an option. The next day, Maria met with Agent Mitchell at a secluded cafe. He provided her with a burner phone and detailed the layout of the meeting place, a high-end private club known for its exclusivity and discreet clientele. "You'll need to blend in," Mitchell advised. "Dress the part and act confident. I've arranged for someone to monitor your location and provide assistance if things go south." Maria nodded, taking in the information. She spent the rest of the day preparing, researching the club's guest list and the typical attire of its patrons. By evening, she felt as ready as she could be under the circumstances. Donning a tailored suit and donning an air of professionalism, Maria arrived at the club just before the meeting was set to begin. The bouncer gave her a cursory glance before letting her through, assuming she was there for legitimate business. Inside, the club was dimly lit, with elegant decor and a subdued atmosphere. Groups of well-dressed individuals mingled, their conversations hushed. Maria approached the bar and ordered a drink, scanning the room for any signs of the corrupt officers or cartel members. She spotted several individuals who matched the descriptions Mitchell had provided, including a few DEA agents who seemed out of place. As the evening progressed, the tension in the air grew palpable. Maria kept her composure, subtly using her burner phone to communicate with Mitchell, who was tracking her movements and providing real-time updates. Finally, a small group gathered in a private lounge area, their voices low and urgent. Maria recognized some of the faces from the guest list, officers she had seen in various news reports related to the DEA corruption allegations. She discreetly positioned herself within earshot, trying to catch snippets of their conversation. "We need to secure the next shipment," one of the men said. "The church is getting too much attention, and the DEA is getting suspicious. Make sure the new statues are up to standard. No mistakes this time." Maria's heart pounded. This was exactly what Mitchell had hoped for. She quickly began recording the conversation with her phone, ensuring the evidence was captured. As the discussion continued, the group started to disperse, satisfied with the arrangements. Before Maria could leave, one of the men approached her. "Excuse me, miss," he said with a forced smile, "I didn't catch your name. Are you here for the meeting?" Maintaining her composure, Maria replied, "Yes, I'm Maria Lopez. I was invited by Jorge Fuentes. I wanted to discuss some details about the shipments." The man nodded, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "Right. Let me escort you to the lounge." Maria felt a chill run down her spine but kept her expression neutral. As they walked towards the lounge, she subtly activated her burner phone to alert Mitchell of the impending confrontation. Once inside, the atmosphere changed. The man introduced her to the others, who greeted her with cautious smiles. They began discussing logistics, unaware that Maria was recording every word. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the entrance. Another group of men, clearly more aggressive, burst into the lounge. "This is a raid," one of them shouted. Panic ensued as people scrambled to hide or escape. Maria seized the moment. Using the chaos to her advantage, she slipped out of the room, unnoticed amid the confusion. She raced back to her car, heart pounding, and called Mitchell to inform him that she had the evidence but needed immediate extraction. Mitchell responded swiftly. "I'm sending a car to pick you up. Stay safe." As Maria waited for her rescue, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment mixed with dread. She had the evidence needed to expose the corruption, but the danger was far from over. The cartel and the compromised DEA officers would stop at nothing to protect their interests. When the car arrived, Maria got in and they sped away from the club. Inside the car, Mitchell reviewed the recordings she had made. "This is solid evidence," he said, a note of relief in his voice. "We can use this to take down the entire operation. But we need to move quickly before they realize we have what we need." Maria nodded, exhausted but resolute. "What's the next step?" "We'll coordinate with federal authorities to launch simultaneous raids across multiple locations. It's going to be a large operation, but with this evidence, we can finally bring them down," Mitchell explained. As they drove through the night, Maria felt a glimmer of hope. The truth was within reach, and she was playing a pivotal role in dismantling a dangerous criminal network. But she also knew that the battle was far from over and that her fight for justice had only just begun. Maria spent the next few days in hiding, waiting for word from Mitchell about the raids. Each passing hour was filled with tension, knowing that any misstep could expose her or her clients to even greater danger. When the call finally came, it wasn't the voice of victory she had hoped for, it was Mitchell, and his tone was grim. "We have a problem," he said. "The raids were compromised." Maria's heart sank. "What do you mean compromised?" "Someone leaked our plans," Mitchell continued. "The cartel knew we were coming. Most of the targets were gone before we even arrived. We managed to arrest a few low-level operatives, but the key players vanished." Maria's mind raced. It had to be someone inside the DEA or the police, someone with enough access to the operation to warn the cartel. But who? And why? She felt a growing sense of dread. Everything she had risked, all the evidence she had gathered, seemed to be crumbling before her eyes. "What about the officers involved?" Maria asked. "The ones on the cartel's payroll? They're still under investigation, but it's going to be harder now that the operation is blown. They'll cover their tracks, and without direct evidence, we might not be able to touch them." Maria clenched her fists, frustration boiling inside her. They had been so close to taking the cartel down. Now, it felt like they were back at square one, with the enemy one step ahead. But Mitchell wasn't finished. "There's something else, Maria. I've been doing some digging of my own. I found out who leaked the operation." He paused, as if weighing his next words carefully. It was Jorge Fuentes. Maria's breath caught. Jorge, the man who had been handling the shipments, had betrayed them all along. He was the link between the cartel and the corrupted law enforcement officials. It made sense now, his hesitation, his vague answers. He had been playing both sides from the start. "Where is he?" Maria asked, her voice cold. "He's gone underground," Mitchell replied. "We're searching for him, but he's a ghost. He's been part of this for a long time, and he knows how to disappear." Maria's mind whirled. Fuentes was the key. If they could find him, they could still bring the whole operation down. But time was running out, and she knew the cartel wouldn't stop until everyone involved, herself included, was silenced. She hung up the phone and sat in silence for a moment, her resolve hardening. There was only one thing left to do. That night, Maria returned to the church, where Father Hector and the remaining congregation members were waiting anxiously for news. She explained the situation, sparing no details. Their lives were in danger, and the cartel wasn't going to back down. "We can't stay here," Father Hector said quietly, looking around at the faces of his parishioners. "But where will we go?" Maria had already thought of that. "I've made arrangements to move you all to a safe location," she said. "I'll make sure you're protected until this is over." Father Hector nodded, gratitude and fear mingling in his eyes. "Thank you, Maria. You've done more than we could have ever asked." As the church members prepared to leave, Maria stayed behind, watching the empty building. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on her. She had uncovered the truth, but at what cost? Lives had been shattered, and the fight was far from over. The next day, as Maria drove away from the city, her phone buzzed with a new message. She expected it to be from Mitchell, but it wasn't. The number was unfamiliar, and the message was brief. "You've been warned. This isn't over." Maria stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The cartel was still watching. They were still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. As she put the phone down, Maria knew one thing for certain: the justice she sought wouldn't come easily. The system was flawed, and the line between right and wrong was blurred by power, greed, and corruption. But she couldn't stop now. Too many lives depended on her. And so, as she drove into the unknown, Maria prepared for the final battle, knowing that this was only the beginning of a war that would test everything she believed in. Imagine yourself in Maria Lopez's shoes, with an entire congregation's lives in your hands, threatened by a ruthless cartel, and on top of that, not knowing who to trust. Would you keep pushing forward, knowing the next turn could be your last? Or would you step back, protecting yourself and leaving justice for someone else to pursue? How far would you go to uncover the truth, knowing the system is corrupt and your enemies are always one step ahead? Now, think, how would you have handled this story? Would you risk everything for your clients or step away before losing control? And more importantly, who do you think is the real villain here? The cartel, the corrupt officers, or the system that allowed this web of power and corruption to exist? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you were Maria, what would you have done differently? How would your ideal ending play out? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell to get more legal thrillers like this one. Let's dive deep into the darkest dilemmas of justice together.